Fear Not, Episode 71. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hello, everybody. Today, you and I are going to be joined by Noah Elkrief. Hey, Noah, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Yes, I'm well, thank you. Are you ready to fear not today?
I am ready.
Noah Elkrief is the author of the #1 best-selling counseling book on Amazon, A Guide to the Present Moment. He helps people to quickly lose their anxiety, depression, loneliness, hurt, anger, shame, stress, and guilt. He believes that no matter how intense your suffering is, you can instantly lose it when you simply discover that the thoughts which create your unwanted emotions aren't true. Through his website and YouTube channel, Noah helps people to fully discover that their own thoughts have caused their unwanted emotions and not by their bad or insufficient circumstances. More importantly, Noah believes that this discovery will help you to directly address these thoughts, thus enabling you to live with much more peace, freedom, and joy in your life. Noah, can you take a few moments to fill in the gaps and maybe also give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Yeah, sure. Well, my personal life, I think the relevant bit is that I was raised meditating. And that played a huge role in sort of my emotional development and the discoveries that I had. And about 7 years ago in 2009, I was a strategy consultant in London. And in one moment, a huge portion of my thoughts left my mind while in meditation. And that happened many times before, but this time the thoughts didn't come back. And from that moment on, when a thought entered my mind, I could see it much more clearly than I previously would. And what I discovered was that the thoughts which were creating my negative emotions weren't true, and that when I stopped believing a thought, it would just dissolve. The thought would dissolve, and the emotion it was creating would dissolve because it was losing the source of its energy. And so I started helping other people to disbelieve their thoughts, and the results have been pretty shocking.
Well, that sounds great, and thank you so much for sharing. Noah, could we start off with you maybe giving us a definition of what you think fear is?
Well, from my perspective, fear is, fight or flight. So the flight part is meant to help protect us from pain, to help us survive. It's inbuilt within our system, and it's really helpful. Where it gets a little sticky is that our body responds now to the threat of emotional pain in the same way as it responds to the threat of physical pain. So what I do is work with that fear of emotional pain part and help people live with it much better or resolve it much easier.
And how do you help them do that?
Well, there's two ways that I help people to stop fearing emotional pain. So one is by discovering that whatever outcome they're afraid of, that they're not afraid of the outcome, they're afraid of the emotional pain that may come, and helping them to either recognize, A, that emotional pain doesn't have to come, right? That the situation doesn't create your unwanted emotion, your emotional pain, that is just your thoughts. Or two, I help people to discover that the emotional pain they're afraid of, worthlessness, inadequacy, loneliness, sadness, actually isn't painful. And I do that by helping people to bring up the emotion that they're afraid of and then exploring it directly.
And would you talk a little bit more about thoughts? I mean, I know that thoughts are important, and I know that you do too. So how important are our thoughts in helping us to deal with fear and having those right thoughts?
Well, the way that I see it is that fear can be created by two sources. One is our thoughts, and two is a buried emotion already in our system from a previous moment in time. And so when we believe any thought, it instantly creates an emotion. And anyone can test it right now. If you close your eyes and tell yourself a story of something that happened or didn't happen, it will create an emotion. You can imagine, winning the lotto and you'll have a feeling. You can imagine getting cheated on and you'll have a feeling. So no matter what we think about, it creates a feeling. And one of the most common things we think about, unintentionally, of course, is what bad things can happen in our life. And anytime we think about something bad that might happen, we experience, one of the forms of fear, whether we call it anxiety, stress, nervousness, or anything else. And so in order to stop creating that fear, we need to stop believing that whatever outcome we think is bad is bad. So as long as you believe in the possibility of a bad outcome, you will fear that outcome. So the disbelieving thoughts component is to recognize that whatever outcome that you think would be bad for your life, to discover that it might not actually be bad and it might not actually create the negative emotions you think it will.
So how does one distinguish that, so that that, right, because a lot of it is confusion. There's the sense of lies, and it's been built up over time. So how do you weed through that so that you can get to the truth?
Yeah, so the most important thing when working with thoughts is to be very, very specific. So anytime we look at thoughts generally, we can get very, very confused. So the easiest way to deal with our thoughts, and particularly our fears, is to first pick one, right? To pick one fear at a time. So I'm afraid of, let's say, my girlfriend cheating on me, right? And then write that one thought down. So it's on paper, so you don't even have to keep track of it in your head. And just look at that one thought, right? It would be bad if my girlfriend cheats on me. Then once you have that, then all of a sudden we have the beginning of our investigation. So the question is, do I know it will be bad for my girlfriend to cheat on me? And the first thing once we ask ourselves that question is, well, what am I afraid of in that scenario? What would be bad there? And what we have to first recognize is the bad part is I think I'll experience loneliness or hurt. Right? So I'm not afraid of the outcome in and of itself. I'm afraid of the pain I believe I will feel if that outcome happens. And that's a really important distinction. As long as you think you're afraid of an outcome, there's no way out. You have to recognize that you're not afraid of an outcome. You're afraid of the pain you think you will feel if that outcome happens. So in order to stop fearing that outcome, you have to stop fearing the pain. And so then you question it in whatever way you feel like it. I offer questions as a free web app on my website or in my book or in my videos, but there's unlimited questions you can ask to discover a thought isn't true. So in this example, if I saw I was afraid of feeling hurt if my girlfriend cheated on me, I would look, well, why would I feel hurt? I would feel hurt from believing if she doesn't like me, it means I'm not good enough. Well, then I would question that. Well, if she doesn't like a movie, does that mean the movie isn't good enough? If she thinks a painting is ugly, does that mean the painting is ugly? And I would recognize that her opinion about anything else means nothing about the thing itself. So therefore, her opinion about me means nothing about me. Or if I was afraid of loneliness that I would feel if she cheated, then I would question. So if she leaves me and I'm by myself, does that mean I'll experience loneliness? Well, what creates loneliness? Is everyone that's alone feeling lonely? Well, then it's not being alone that creates loneliness. It's just a thought, right? And then I would recognize, is it true I can't be happy? And I would question it in different ways to discover that her cheating on me won't create pain, that it will only be my thoughts, and I can disbelieve those thoughts so I don't have to feel the pain. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Sure does. Can you talk to us a little bit more about meditation? For those of us that may not have really truly dived into it, is there a good place for us to start, or maybe you can give us some guidance on that?
Yeah, I can give you some guidance. So there's a lot of different ways to meditate, and every method has its own form of value. So the most important thing when meditating is that you listen to what resonates. So just because it worked for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Everybody has to follow what feels right for them at a particular moment in time. But the way that I offer, the type that I find to be quite useful, is to not try to do anything. So instead of trying to make your mind silent or try to make it positive or get rid of the negative or any of that sort of stuff, the form of meditation that I've used in my life has been to just sit and watch what arises. So all of us are experiencing thoughts almost constantly, but yet the way that we pursue happiness is by trying to get away from them. So bringing our attention outward to TV, internet, friends, work, whatever else. And as long as we're not paying attention to our thoughts, we're not addressing them, which means we're doing nothing to actually stop the negative thoughts and feelings from arising. So in meditation, what I do is I watch the thoughts and explore them, right? Just notice them. So I don't actively do anything. I just sit there, let every thought arise, whether it's positive or negative, whether it's crazy or logical, just let every thought arise. And when I let the thoughts arise, what happens is I stop identifying with them, right? So normally when we have a thought that says, I like or I hate, we think, I like, I hate, right? It feels like it's me who's liking and hating. But what happens in meditation is we take a slight step backwards, metaphorically, and it ends up being we start watching the thought. So it's like I see a thought says I like, a thought says I hate, instead of I like, I hate. And then when we take that step back and we watch our thoughts, all of a sudden we can see our thoughts much more clearly. We can start seeing them much more objectively. And so therefore in meditation there's no goal, right? It's not about doing anything, fixing anything. It's just about watching. And that watching in and of itself creates that distance or separation that allows us to see our thoughts more objectively in our life, which then helps us to use a process like mine to investigate the thoughts. So if you try to investigate your thoughts from fully identifying with your thoughts, it's much harder than if you're investigating your thoughts from that step back.
Isn't that a little bit contrary to, I mean, when you sort of just observe and you just let
Yeah.
all the emotions come, I know from like a Christian standpoint of view that you're supposed to weed out those negative thoughts. So that's the little bit the confusing part is that.
Well, the question is, you have to think about, so let's say the goal is to weed out the negative thoughts, right? Let's say that is the ultimate goal. And the question is, how do I do that? So you can't push them out, right? Anybody who's listening to this knows if you try to get rid of a negative thought, it doesn't go away, right? So the way to stop giving attention to a negative thought is to cut off its energy source, to cut off its supply. And its supply is our belief in that thought. So as long as we believe the negative thought, it will keep showing up and it will keep getting energy. So the way to stop giving it energy is to stop believing it. But how do you stop believing it? Now you can use an active method like mine where you investigate its validity. But what happens is it's easier to investigate the validity of a thought when you're not identifying with it. So meditation is can be viewed as the preparation. So when you don't identify with the thought, when you take a step back and you just watch the thought, are aware of it, it helps you to then later on question and investigate the validity of the thoughts so the negative thoughts don't keep arising, right? But it's sort of like you could say the meditation is indirect. It's the preparation. You know, it's like stretching before the basketball game. So the goal of the basketball game is to make shots. But if you haven't stretched, maybe you'll get injured while trying to play the game. Make sense?
Yes. Noah, I know you've got a new book coming out. Would you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah. So my first book was about how to discover that the thoughts which create your anxiety and other emotions aren't true. So that was discovering whatever outcome you think is bad might not be bad for you, right? That you don't know all the future effects of any outcome. So to say that it would be bad for your life is an assumption that you don't know to be true. But what I discovered through the few years after I wrote that book is that a lot of people either aren't able to disbelieve their thoughts or they have a lot of buried emotions from their past that they don't know how to deal with. So when we stop believing a thought, it stops creating emotion. But if in the past you experienced an emotion, you didn't allow it to express itself and you pushed it down, then you can keep experiencing that emotion over and over again when it gets triggered in your life, even if you're not believing any conscious thought. So in this book, what I do is a couple of different things. So with regards to anxiety, when we have anxiety in any situation where there's no possibility of physical pain, it's because we're afraid of some form of emotional pain. And I break down emotional pain into just two very simple categories. Emotional pain created by believing there's something wrong with me, or emotional pain created by believing there's something wrong with life. So the emotional pain from believing there's something wrong with me would be shame, inadequacy, hurt, worthlessness, unworthiness, that sort of stuff. And emotions created by believing there's something wrong with life would be sadness, emptiness, boredom, lack, loneliness. And so anytime that we have anxiety or nervousness or fear in a situation where there's no physical pain, we're afraid of one of those two types of emotions almost always. And so in order to stop fearing those emotions, instead of trying to avoid them, what I do is I actually bring up those emotions in people. I have a method that helps people to bring up those emotions right now and discover that those painful emotions are actually peaceful when you let them express themselves. So to elaborate on that, imagine that there's somebody outside your door that you're really scared of, okay? And then you ask me to help you get rid of him. Now, if I get rid of him, maybe you don't have as much fear right now because he's gone, but you'll still fear him coming back. In order to truly completely lose your fear, what I invite you to do is to invite him into your house, give him a knife, blindfold yourself, and see what he does to you. If he bakes you a cake, you never need to fear him again, right? Now, in real life, obviously, that's not recommended. But with our emotions, whenever we're scared of some form of worthlessness or sadness, instead of trying to avoid it, what I recommend doing is actually bringing up the emotion you fear now and exploring it in order to discover that it is not as dangerous as you think it is. Is that clear so far?
Very much so.
Yeah, so what happens is, so going back to, let's say, an example of like a breakup. So let's say we're scared of our partner breaking up with us. So what I would do is ask you, well, what emotion are you afraid to feel? Right? And maybe you say, well, I'm afraid to feel hurt. I'm afraid to feel unworthy. So instead of trying to make sure you never feel that by trying to get security and safety that they'll never break up with you, which you'll never get, you'll never know for sure they won't break up with you, which means there's always this fear hanging over your head that you'll have to feel that hurt and unworthiness. Another way to do it is to just make yourself feel hurt and unworthy now. So imagine them cheating, imagine them breaking up with you, imagine them insulting you in the worst possible ways, and tell yourself they're right. I'm worthless, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough. And then watch what it creates. And what it will create is some sort of sensation in your body that we normally call an emotion. And normally it shows up as like a heavy or hard ball in our chest, stomach, or solar plexus area. And once that emotion comes up, what we unconsciously do is we tend to call it a name, right? So we say, I feel unworthy, I feel hurt, I feel inadequate. But none of those words describe what you're actually feeling. When you say, I feel unworthy, hurt, or inadequate, it tells me nothing about the size, the location, the density, the movement, the temperature. It tells me nothing about the actual physical qualities of the sensation in your experience. All of those words are actually just synonyms for bad. So when you say, I feel hurt, I feel sad, I feel lonely, I feel inadequate, all of those are saying, I feel badness. And once we call it badness, once we call it a name, we automatically hate it, dislike it, fear it, or try to get rid of it. So what I recommend doing is actually exploring the sensation itself, like what are its physical qualities, and stop calling it a name. The second part of it is to recognize that it doesn't prove anything about you. When we say I feel unworthy, right, we're sort of viewing the emotion as proof that I'm unworthy. It's like if I wasn't unworthy, I wouldn't feel unworthy. But you only feel this sensation because you believe a thought that you're unworthy. So when we stop viewing the emotion, the sensation, the energy as proof that we're not good enough, it stops being as much of a threat. And so what I invite people to do is to actually just explore it and let it do what it wants. So when we try to get rid of an emotion, what we end up doing is pushing down on it, making it harder, heavier, and keeping it in our system. But if we just allow the emotion to do what it wants, it just dissolves. It just expresses itself and dissolves, and not necessarily through tears or anything that you think it normally expresses it itself as. It may just spread out and dissipate. It may get smaller and dissipate, but it always goes when you just allow it to do what it wants, and it goes in a very peaceful way, right? So to make that more clear, if I tell you you're amazing and you believe me, you'll have a feeling that you might call pleasure, right? A high. But that will go in a few seconds, maybe a few minutes at most, because you don't fight it, you don't resist it. It just, you get that charge, you let it do what it wants, and it just goes. But if I tell you that you're a fool in one way or another, and you believe me, you can experience that emotion for the rest of your life, right? And you'll probably experience it for at least a few hours. The reason why isn't because negative thoughts have more power than positive thoughts. It's because we don't allow the emotion to express itself. We just push it down and keep it in our system and then keep triggering it over and over and over again.
Wow.
Is that clear?
Yeah, no, that's a lot to think about too. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. So what this is about is really discovering that our negative emotions aren't negative, that every emotion's natural expression is peaceful. So it's sort of like if you jump into a river with a strong current and you believe that where the river will take you is dangerous, then you'll fight against it. But if then you tell me the water's pushing so hard against me, the water's unenjoyable, it's not true. Your fight against it is what makes it painful. If you just flow with the river, it's quite nice. So the same applies with our negative emotions. As long as we fear negative emotions, we're never free. As long as we believe they're terrible, we're never free. Right? I mean, think about the analogy of sort of like playing a sport. Right? If you have won the last 100 games in a row, but you still hate losing, no matter how many games you win, you are never free because you'll always fear losing. Doesn't matter how many games you win in a row, you'll never know you'll win the next game. So what I recommend that people do if they want freedom is to discover that losing is peaceful. And once you enjoy losing, that completely changes the game. Then you can enjoy playing fully.
That's those are heavy thoughts indeed. Good ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens is we're playing this game in life. People don't realize it. You know, they're trying to get the good outcomes and avoid the bad outcomes. So they think. But really everything we're doing in life is trying to get the good feelings and avoid the bad feelings. But as long as we believe in the concept of bad feelings, right, we're never fully free. Everything has a pressure because if it doesn't go right, the bad feelings will come. So to really get out of that trap, makes sense to just discover that the bad feelings aren't bad. But it doesn't do any good to believe that. It doesn't do any good to know that as a concept. It has to be directly discovered in our own body, not even in our mind, right? Because that can sound rational, maybe, or maybe not, but it has to be discovered in our own body, right? By facing what we fear, which is our own feelings, pain, and discovering that if we don't fight it, it just moves around, spreads, and dissolves.
Almost like what you resist persists.
Exactly. It is exactly that, right? If you try to get rid of it, you can't push the emotion out of your body. So what we end up doing when we try to get rid of an emotion is trying to make it as small as possible, right? But think about it like a sponge, right? If you try to like push a sponge down into as small of an area as possible, it gets more dense, more hard, more heavy. So the same applies with our emotions, and it stays in our system, right? So we want to remove that force against the negative emotions, and that force is our fear and hatred of it. And when we remove our fear and hatred of an emotion, it can just do what it wants to do, which is quite pleasant, no matter what the negative emotion is. I mean, you should see what I do in sessions. I mean, it's sort of like I'm a bondage person. Like I just, whatever people are afraid of, I make them feel it now, right? If you're afraid of getting cheated on, if you're afraid to lose your job, even if you're afraid of a loved one dying, if you don't want to live with that fear anymore, the easiest way, depending, for me anyhow, is to make them imagine it happening now and just face that feeling now, right? And then you're done with it. You don't have to keep living in fear of what may happen because you were already faced what may happen, which is the feeling, right? Because feelings are created by thoughts, not by facts. You can feel anything right now, right? If you, for example, if you think a loved one died, you'll have a feeling, even if they didn't actually die. If you believe they died, parents may know this from, if the kid is late for their curfew and not picking up their phone, and they believe something happened to their kid, they can experience tremendous sadness, fear, hurt, guilt, whatever, even if the kid is okay. On the other hand, right, if a loved one is hurt in some way and you don't know about it, you feel fine. We don't feel the facts. We only feel our thoughts.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here going. I mean, I've studied acting. It's almost on the same thing. We tell ourselves an imaginary story, and then we allow that to grow and manifest, and that's our emotional prep. It's not even real, but it leads you to feel
Yeah.
anger and the sadness or whatever that you need for that particular scene. I hadn't really
It's
thought
it's
about that.
exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Every emotion we experience is only created by what's going on in our mind, right? It's just and the more we explore it, the more obvious it becomes. Most people aren't exploring their experience. They're just trying to get the good feelings and avoid the bad feelings, which is fine. There's no problem with that. But what happens is we're living life always waiting for the next happy moment. We have happy moment, then sadness, lack, boredom, anxiety, then happy moment again. There's only one issue with that, right? Happy moments don't add up. They don't accumulate. So when we live life without actually directly addressing our negative emotions, we're not increasing our happiness. We're just living life on repeat, waiting for the next happy moment, waiting for the next happy moment, but we're not doing anything about it, right? So one way to do something about it is to disbelieve our thoughts, to question the validity of the negative thoughts. And the other way is to discover that the emotions we hate and fear are actually peaceful, so that we don't go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. We just live free, live happy, which we're told is like an impossibility, because the normal experience in life is suffering. Everybody you've ever met probably lives with anxiety, lives with worries about what their parents think, lives with anxiety about health, lives with anxiety about money, right? Lives with loneliness, sadness, insecurity about their personality or looks. Almost every single person we've ever met, if not every person, has all that stuff, right? Because even the people we go to for help have all that stuff. So there is another way, yeah, if people, if people are interested.
And how would someone connect with you, Noah, if they wanted to do that?
Well, right now I'm not doing sessions. I stopped taking new clients because I got too busy, and I need to spend more time create content for a wider audience instead of spending my time one-on-one. So I'm not taking new clients at this moment, but hopefully there'll be. I haven't made a video on YouTube in about a year and a half because I've been focused for the last really 2.5 years on this new book. But my new book will probably be out in around July or June, and I'm going to be creating more YouTube videos, apps for these methods, and some online courses and things along these lines. Because, my book, A Guide to the Present Moment, has been the #1 best-selling counseling book for a lot of the last few years since 2012 when it came out, and people have found it to be incredibly helpful. And this new book about discovering that the emotions we hate and fear are actually peaceful is is so much more effective. I mean, the impact that I see in sessions over and over again is a joke. It's really quite amazing, and anyone can discover it. You don't need me for it. You just bring up an emotion you hate and fear and just explore it like you're a scientist. Like, what is this thing that I call an emotion? It's the same thing as being a racist. If you see somebody and call them a terrorist or a gangster, you will hate and fear them because gangster and terrorist means bad and dangerous, right? But if I ask you who's in front of you and you tell me a terrorist or a gangster, you're not telling me who's in front of you. And even if they're the nicest guy in the world, if you view them as a gangster or terrorist, you'll never get to know them. You see them as your concept, right? You will hate and fear them even if they are incredibly nice. And the same thing applies to our negative emotions. If we call it worthlessness, sadness, loneliness, even fear, right? We've already decided our relationship with that emotion, with that sensation, which is it's bad and dangerous. I don't want to go there. But what if we went where we didn't want to go, right? So I break it down into sort of two types of emotions: our protective emotions, which is the fight or flight, fear or anger, and then our emotional pain, which is the sort of sadness, loneliness, and then inadequacy, worthlessness. And so anytime we experience fight or flight, fear or anger, ask ourselves, what type of emotion am I afraid to feel right now? And can I just make myself feel it, discover it's not dangerous, and then I lose my anger or fear because I don't have anything to protect myself from anymore. But it's not enough to just understand that in our mind. Our body needs to recognize that what it's fearing isn't dangerous. Our body needs to fully see, because this is fight or flight is a body response. So our body needs to be so fully on board in order to not produce that fight or flight response.
Noah, what parting advice would you like to leave with us today?
Well, I would say that if we keep doing the same thing, we'll keep getting the same results. And so what we have to ask ourselves in life, or the most important question to ask ourselves in life, is what is the most important thing to me in my life? So we tend to go through life just pursuing ideas that were sort of imprinted upon us, pursuing success, pursuing purpose, pursuing passion, pursuing family, wife, husband, kids, whatever, right? And all of that is beautiful and fine and amazing. But what is the number one most important thing to you in life? What do you want more than anything else in life? If I gave you two choices, achieve all your goals, but live with suffering, or achieve nothing, get nothing you ever wanted, but live completely free and happy in every moment, which would you choose? And if we're able to be really honest with ourselves, we can see, actually, what I want more than anything else is freedom from pain, which can also be called happiness, joy, love, connection. And once we see that that's what we want, right? That doesn't mean we won't pursue all those other things. It means that we can actually start pursuing happiness too. Because the pursuit of success, the pursuit of marriage, the pursuit of purpose or passion or anything is completely separate from the pursuit of happiness. As long as we don't recognize we want happiness and emotional freedom more than anything else, we're never going to get it. So the most important thing is to figure out what the most important thing is. And then your life will move in that direction more and more. So I think that's my parting words.
Something very much to consider. Noah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And I know we're on big different time zones here, so I thank you for taking the time and for sharing all your knowledge and your information.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Billy.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.